Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. With me today, as my very special guest, is Jeff Wice, who I've known for decades, both through political things, through election-related legislation, and through my work as a Jewish legislator. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time. Looking forward to this
It's
conversation.
a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So you there's so much in your past, but I want to spend most of the time in the present with all that you do. You went to George Washington, where you graduated with English language and literature as your degree, which I think is
Right.
very cool. And then law degree from Antioch. Uh, you've been a law professor at New York Law and at SUNY Buffalo. So talk about, I'm going to start. How did you first get interested in politics and policy? What's the first
Well,
time?
to be very honest, my father was active in politics when I was a little kid, and I go door to door with him for campaigns, beginning with growing up in New York with Governor Nelson Rockefeller back in the late
Mhm.
1950s, if you can go that far back and
Wow.
look how old I am. But I really got into politics as something I wanted to do in 1968 when Robert Kennedy ran for president, and I worked in that campaign. In fact, I was the only New York high school student to go with a busload of college students to Indiana to work for Senator Kennedy in the primary that he won
Wow.
back then. So I've been a Kennedy Democrat for half a century now.
Can we clarify RFK? What do you think of
The
RFK Jr.?
the father.
Yes. Okay.
The Kennedy family is huge, and the majority of them have disclaimed the younger.
Yes. Sadly, our Secretary of Health and Human Services. What was the first campaign? What was the first time you voted? Do you remember?
George McGovern for president in 1972, I recall.
Okay. I am curious about, you've been a law professor, as I said. And you've been doing it a long time. How have law students changed over the years? Their priorities, their goals, the methods of your teaching or their learning?
Things have changed a lot. I did not have the benefit of computers when I went to law school. And this is just going back to the 1980s, so it's not that ancient, a history. But students now all have laptops. They have computer access to all the kinds of things that I had to look up in with small font paper in stacks of libraries far in the far back corners. It's very much different now in the computer age. Everything is, electronic. Students have laptops in class where I once caught a student watching a sports game when I saw him go, yes, when he saw the score. So, many of the students are at least 40 years, 45 years younger than I
Wow.
am. And I've got to make sure I'm relating to them on the same page. And from the reviews I see of my evaluations, I've done a good job so far, but you've got to make sure that they are not your equal. I used to joke, well, I'm not Mr. Weiss. My father was Mr. Weiss. I'm Jeff.
And there
But
you go.
you have to live with these things as you get older.
Have they changed in terms of career goals, ideology, in terms of public policy, government service versus corporate America?
That seems to be cyclical because when I grew up, most of us were involved with the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. And I'll tell you, in 1988, my wife and I went to a Grateful Dead concert at the old Cap Center in
Uh-huh.
Landover.
Uh-huh.
And we were just shocked to see George Bush supporters for the Grateful Dead concert. So
Wow.
things have changed, and I think students have different financial situations. They've got such the student loan burdens they've got, and the job market are, I think, much different. That it was a lot easier to go from, let's say, law school or graduate school into a professional career track than it is now. The job market is much tougher.
Yes. Well, and especially now with so many federal employees laid off by the Trump-Musk administration, as I call it, competing for the same jobs. Let's pivot to some of your work in Albany and in DC. You have worked with the New York State assembly for a very long time. Why don't you talk
Well,
about
I
that?
had a very unique career. I'll just go back in 1975. The National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, was created amongst the 50 state legislatures. And they opened up an office building in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill
Yep.
called the Hall of States, 444 North Capitol. And they invited states to open up Washington, D.C. state legislative offices. So in the late 1976, I got on board. I was then I had lived in D.C., worked for Pat Moynihan when he ran for the U.S. Senate in New York that year, moved back to D.C. where my girlfriend, now wife, and I were, living. And I opened up an office, a liaison office in Washington for the New York Assembly. And now it's nearly 50 years later. I
Yes.
worked for 5 Assembly speakers, 4 Democratic Senate leaders. I retired. Now I'm back there basically 1 hour or so a week doing some work for one member, but I created a career based on the NCSL becoming a national organization and bringing people to Washington. And I branched out in a number of ways, both representing the New York legislature, also the Democratic Party, working on redistricting with state legislators and with Jewish state legislators.
We are going to get to all of that. Let's start with the first step before we get to redistricting is the census. And that is a constitutional requirement that every single person in America has to be counted once every 10 years. So why don't you talk about that?
Well, at the very beginning, the first section of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, requires that a census be taken every 10 years of the population for the purposes of allocating congressional districts among the states. That's called reapportionment. So we start at the very beginning. Ever since 1790, a census has been taken every 10 years.
So let's talk about how challenging that is, especially today, and how political that is. So there are people who are not yet citizens and they're nervous about being counted. And there's a lot of information that's gathered, financial and where you live and what your house, what amenities are in your house. Why don't you talk about how hard it is to count everyone?
The census every 10 years, the decennial census takes a survey of basically your name, your age, your race, and how many people live in your house.
Mhm.
There's something else called the American Community Survey that's sent out on a rotating basis every year, all the time, that asks some of the socioeconomic questions on where you work and how many rooms are in your house and other related issues, on your background. But the decennial census, the hard count, your name, well, your age and your race are the basic numbers used for redistricting congressional districts, state legislatures, county governments, and local governments. And that takes place once every 10 years for the purpose of reaching equal population, equal representation, one person, one vote.
So why does that matter? Explain to someone who doesn't really understand why one person, one vote and getting everyone counted is, how is that relevant?
Well, before one person, one vote, which came out of a U.S. Supreme Court decision in the early 1960s, you'd have state legislatures or congressional districts with possibly 500,000 people in one district and 100,000 people in another district. The
Mhm.
boundaries hadn't been redrawn since the 19th century. So a lawsuit was brought in Tennessee uh, arguing that the misallocation of districts from rural to urban Tennessee was so horrendous that something had to be done about it. So about 65, 70 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a series of decisions that basically require that all districts be of equal population so that my vote and my representation is equal to yours.
Yes. Before I go on from there, are there any cases pending that you fear could modify that in this current Supreme Court?
Uh, Likely, yes. We have a Supreme Court that's now in session, that in the next month or so will have some case law from the court on minority voting rights, whether there's a requirement to draw districts where you have high levels of racially polarized voting and minority voters can't elect their candidates, their preferred candidates, the Louisiana case in particular. But with the new Trump administration, What we don't know yet, and this is still a few years down the pike, is whether the court will change the population base required for redistricting. Right now, for 200 plus years, every person is counted for this in the census, regardless of citizenship status. And those same numbers are used to redraw the district boundaries.
Yes.
And there's an effort underway to either exclude undocumented persons from the census. There's, excuse me, an effort also to require that the districting itself, the line drawing, be based on either citizens or registered voters or people only over 18. And
Mm.
those are very serious threats to our democracy and would change how things are being done for the first time since 1790.
You have worries that the Trump administration might try to pursue that?
Well, they've already got a lawsuit that four states, West Virginia, Kansas, Louisiana, and Ohio, have brought in federal court in Louisiana to require the congressional reapportionment or the allocation of state of districts among the states be based on citizens only, not everybody.
Hmm.
There's also legislation in Congress to do that. We expect the Trump administration to add a citizenship question to the census. The
Mm.
question itself is not unconstitutional, but the impact of it will send a fear factor, a real
Absolutely.
chilling effect that people are not going to want to tell the government anything about themselves, particularly their status, if you've got ICE around the corner waiting to depart, deport you.
Yep.
That's a very big, serious threat.
Huge, huge. Okay, another thing to worry about with the with this administration. Let's talk about what most folks call gerrymandering, but you call gerrymandering. Elbridge Jerry, Elbridge Gary. What is it? Why do we worry about it?
Well, back in 1812, Governor Elbridge Gerry, I'll pronounce it the way he did with a hard G,
Archie.
approved a state Senate map in Massachusetts where the districts were shaped in such a way that it looked like a salamander. This is the
Mhm.
area from Boston to New Hampshire. And the press picked up on it and called this Senate map a gerrymander
Gerrymander.
or a gerrymander. It's been
Right.
anglicized to be gerrymander. I simply call it gerrymander to be true to Elbridge.
Uh,
But gerrymandering is the practice of drawing district boundaries to favor one political party over another.
mhm. So you are a Democratic redistricting expert, recognized as such and deferred to as such at the national level. NCSL, National Conference of State Legislature, you're the Democratic co-chair, National Democratic Redistricting Commission. You have done all this. If it's supposed to be fair, and if it's supposed to be even, Steven, and drawing the lines thoughtfully, and some states are having computers do it or commissions do it, why should there be Democratic and Republican experts in this?
Well, I look at it also now that as a law professor, I try to be more nonpartisan or bipartisan, but
Okay,
essentially one party is going to come out on top as the winner in the legislative chamber. Do you want Mike Johnson as speaker, or do you want Hakeem Jeffries as speaker?
right.
You can't have both. And that is based on the number of representatives that vote for one party or the other. So it's not a zero, it's a zero sum game. There are winners and losers here. It's not a competitive process that's 50-50. So the problem though is that some states with partisan control by one party
Yes.
draw the lines to such an egregious degree. They get greedy, they overreach, they
Hmm.
admit things they shouldn't, and they just frankly act stupidly, if I can
Yeah.
say so. And that's where there is a way to draw the lines where you could be fair,
Hmm.
objective, consider communities of interest, district, community boundaries, the
Hmm.
human factor, and not go overboard. In North Carolina, about 15 years ago, a Republican leader said, out of 13 districts, I draw all 13 for Republicans if I could. I can only draw 10.
Hmm.
He'd do
Hmm.
more if he could. Those are the kinds of things that just go overboard.
So Larry Hogan, Maryland's former governor and a Republican, tried every year to try to have a commission in the same way that a couple of other states have created. Uh, with the for the appearance of nonpartisanship or bipartisanship. And yet it's clear in a Democratic state like Maryland with Democratic legislators drawing the lines that Republicans feel like they don't always get a fair shake. The problem is that, as you said, in other states with Republicans drawing the line, the worry is that Maryland would single-handedly disarm, and that would hurt us in Congress.
Well, that's true, but there's a way to draw the lines in almost any state where your majority party can retain control, just
Hmm.
not go overboard. The
Yes,
situation a few years back in Wisconsin was one, just to give you the example, where the Democrats got 60% of the vote for their state legislative districts statewide, but only 40% of the districts. The Republicans got 40% of the vote and 60% of the districts. So you were finding a completely lopsided 6-4 margin. You can
hmm.
narrow that a bit. You're still
Yes,
going to be in control.
yes,
And if you do that, you'll avoid the bad optics. You'll avoid the litigation. Whether you win or lose, you're going to waste years of taxpayer money in court.
yes,
Frankly, it's good government. It's not
right,
good government.
right. So, anything else we want to talk about on redistricting before we pivot?
We're only halfway through the decade. It's sooner than later, every 10 years. And so many states are still in court that this is no longer just a once in every 10 years process, but we're going to see cases from 2020 in court all the way through probably 2030.
Oh my golly. So, Jeff, most times my guess there's one lane that they occupy, one thing that they're known for. But with you, we have to really cover two, because since 1997, you have led the National Association of Jewish Legislators, or NAJL. And I remember when I was in the House, we talked about this. Talked about, and now it's been merged with Jewish Federations of North America. Why don't you talk about NAJL? Why you thought it was important to establish? Um,
Well, the National Association of Jewish Legislators was created in 1977
mhm,
during an NCSL meeting where a number of Jewish legislators, and Ben Cardin was one of them, former
mhm.
Speaker and U.S. Senator in Maryland, to create an organization to, at that point in time, to support the Camp David Accords, where President Carter had just negotiated a peace between Israel and Egypt and
Yes,
wanted to create a positive presence for Israel in state capitals. And ever since then, NAJL has operated on a very low budget to provide networking resources and essentially created a fraternity or a sorority of Jewish legislators across the country to work together, share information, and protect Jewish American community priorities in state capitals.
yes. So, how many states even have a Jewish legislator? At least one Jewish legislator.
About 40 some odd states have them right now. There's never been anybody that I can recall in Nebraska or uh, let's see, where else don't we have anybody? Uh, Actually, in Alabama now, interestingly, the Jewish Federation staffer is now a state legislator. But there,
Mm,
but in most states, you have at least one Jewish legislator. There
right.
are about 41 states now that do have Jewish legislators.
And why is that important? What's the importance of having the presence in the legislature?
Well, there's no requirement that a Jewish person serve in the legislature,
Of course.
but what we find now are candidates who happen to be Jewish, who also share Jewish values running for office.
Hmm.
You'd think years back that all the Jewish legislators came from Baltimore, they came from Brooklyn and New York City,
Hmm.
or Miami Beach area. That's no longer the case. We've got more and more Jewish legislators getting elected in rural places than you'd really ever imagine. We've got two in West Virginia, two in Idaho, one in Montana, one in each of the Dakotas. But they don't run as Jewish candidates. They
Right.
happen to be Jewish. And when
Sure.
something happens to the Jewish community, there was an act of anti-Semitism in Montana that caused this one Jewish legislator to come out and say, I've got to say something about this because it affects me and where I come from.
Sure. Wow. Can you tell us a story, Jeff, about an impact that NAJL has had? Something specific.
An impact, there are some, cut and dry impacts like sharing information on how to, enact a kosher protection law or Jewish divorce law under civil
I
law.
tried. I tried sponsoring that. That got so complicated, a Jewish divorce law.
Yeah, but there are some things to make, we look at things on religious freedom to make sure that people can observe their religions without government interference or hindrance. There are
Mm-hmm.
issues like that that always pop up.
Mm-hmm.
And also, at a very core level, we don't want to see state legislative chamber sessions turn into religious events. We try to avoid having ministers, priests, rabbis talk too much about their religions, but try to give a universal message. So we focus a lot on that too.
Yes. Well, I can tell you in Annapolis, anyone who is delivering the invocation to the Senate is sent a flyer and strict instructions. You are not allowed to invoke Jesus. You're not allowed to lobby for legislation or anything. And they submit their prayer in advance. And if it's not acceptable or if they violate it, they are put on a banned for life list. So
Yeah,
because
a
we
lot of
want to be
states do
inclusive.
that, and a lot of people ignore that or just get so overwhelmed with the moment that they get carried away.
Yep. Well, then they're never coming back, at least in Maryland. Um, Anti-Semitism has been just skyrocketing. How are you seeing that, and how do you think NAJL has worked to address
Well, let
that?
me say, given the horror that happened just this week, that we're just horrified, angry, and heartbroken over the murders of two Israeli embassy staffers. NAJL, as you mentioned, is now partnering with the National Jewish Federations uh, network, and our point person at the Federation staff used to share office space with Yaron. Really comes, really close that you
One
actually
of the murder
know,
victims.
know who these people are. So,
Mhm.
aside from our hearts going out to the embassy staff and our colleagues, the American Jewish community in the museum, the anti-Semitism is not something that I recall ever having to deal with growing up in a New York City suburb.
Mhm.
It's something that personally I've never really had to deal with. But when I see how could people be so hateful of you or me just because we happen to be Jewish until we know we're Jewish or we're at a Jewish event or a location. And
Right.
it's really mind-boggling that these thousand-year-old hatreds exist for no apparent reason.
Yes. So on a memorial service for the murder victims, Sarah and Yaron today, one of the speakers was talking about how people who are inclined to want to blame it on the war in Gaza and stuff, he said no Russian is walking down the street worrying about getting shot in the back because Russia invaded Ukraine. So there is something different about being Jewish and being about supporting the land of Israel, the state of Israel.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling for me to pull up at my synagogue and just see people protesting Gaza. It's not a Jewish issue; it's an Israel issue
Right.
where Jewish people happen to be involved. But
Yes.
to see restaurants in New York, smashed or paint thrown at them because they have Israeli cuisine,
Mm,
things like
mm.
this are happening that I never saw before.
Have you seen specific changes since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack in Israel?
Security has been heightened throughout the United States at synagogues and Jewish venues. I'm sure you're going to see an awful lot of that beginning this evening at synagogues as the Jewish Sabbath approaches.
Yes. Yes. Anything else you want to say about NAJL, your hopes, or anything you're
NAJL
working on now?
is a great organization. There's a Black caucus, there's an Hispanic caucus, Asian American caucus. NAJL has people from all different kinds of walks of life. We've got Hispanic legislators who are Jewish.
Mhm.
We have someone elected in New York just 2 days ago who has a Sephardic Jewish background. Someone claimed he's the first Sephardic Jew elected to the New York Senate. And I
Hmm.
found out last night, unbeknownst to me, a state senator in New York who actually went to elementary school with and have known now all my life. His
Mm.
mother was Sephardic, and he, in fact, was, as far as we know, probably the first Sephardic senator. This goes back to the 1970s, so you find new things out all the time.
Why don't you, for folks who may not know, why don't you just explain briefly the difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazi?
Well, as Jews go, most Jews come from Europe or the Middle East, and they are referred to as Ashkenazic. Jews who came from Spain and who were expelled from Spain in the 1490s, I recall, are Sephardic Jews and have different customs, different food, different ways of praying, but they're still all fully Jewish.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Well, Jeff Weiss, it is time for the Fast Five. Five quick questions, five quick answers to let folks get to know a little bit more about you. So, first question is what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Best piece of advice I've ever been given is to probably be thorough and complete in what you do.
Okay, that's a good one. Question number two, what is your favorite source of news?
I hate to admit it, but I'm proud to admit it. I've read the New York Times almost every day since fifth grade. I can count the number of days I haven't seen the actual paper version
Uh-huh.
on like 20 fingers.
Wow. Okay. Do you do Wordle?
I did. It got too
Okay.
much for me.
Okay.
My wife does it though.
Okay. Question number three. If you could learn a new skill and be really good at it, what would you choose?
A new skill, how to play boogie woogie piano. I can
Fun.
play the piano, but not to the degree I really like to play it.
Okay. That's cool. If you could meet any historical figure and have a conversation, whom would you choose?
It would be Robert Kennedy.
Okay.
I saw him but didn't meet him, and I've modeled my political sensibilities and priorities after what he did and taught us. So he'd be one person, and I worked for people on his staff when he was in the U.S. Senate. So I
Mm,
feel as if I would know him if I knew him, and
mm,
would have liked to be able to meet him.
nice. Nice. And question number five, the question I ask everyone of my guests, Jeff Weiss from NAJL, National Redistricting Guru. What is your hidden secret superpower? What is a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Well, I spent 18 years as an auxiliary member of the New York City Police Department. And I've got some skills that I've learned as an unarmed police officer that can't be replicated. How to stand in a street corner to be observant, how to direct traffic, just things that ordinarily you wouldn't do.
I love that. That's cool. All right. Well, Jeff, it has been an honor to know you for about 40 years, more than 40 years, basically my whole political career. And thank you for all you've done throughout your career and all you continue to do.
Well, thank you for having me on.
A real pleasure. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.